Thank you for joining us again, and hopefully you are enjoying the conference, the Economic Inclusion Conference. It has been wonderful to this point, and we're looking forward to the rest of the program. But I am so grateful and glad to have with me representatives from the Annie E. Casey Foundation who are going to be with us in this segment and share information not only about the foundation, the organization, but also about themselves and the work that they do, and how we might intersect and collaborate so that we can all do greater work. So welcome, and I'm going to ask each of you, Mr. Pring Westbrook and Ms. Sarah Cooper, if you would introduce yourselves and tell us what your roles are at the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
Certainly. Well, hello to everyone. I'm T'Pring Westbrook, and I am a senior research associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And what that basically means is the Annie E. Casey Foundation, we do work across a lot of program areas, mostly in kind of family and community and systems as a way to bring about our vision of all children having a brighter future. And to support the programs that and the program units that are doing that work, we have some what we call capacity building work units, and those units kind of work across the foundation to provide support and wraparound knowledge, if you will, for our programmatic units. So within my team, we provide research and evaluation support, and we do this. My particular portfolio is looking at Baltimore. We have also, I have Atlanta in my portfolio, and we do everything from early childhood education to community safety to economic opportunities.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great segue. My name is Sarah Cooper, and I'm a senior associate for economic opportunity at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and I sit in our Baltimore Civic Site team. Our headquarters are in Baltimore, and we care deeply about Baltimore. And so we have a whole team that's built around Baltimore grant making. Specifically with economic opportunity, my investments range from supporting direct workforce services organizations, so those amazing organizations in the city that are supporting residents with, employment, education, training, kind of all the services and supports that residents may need to be successful. Also like to bring support organizations with their capacity to do the great work and the technical assistance to do the great work. So that's my portfolio in a high level nutshell.
Thank you so much for that. And even as both of you have shared your roles, I have questions that are just exploding in my head, but I'll try to hold myself back and so that we can pace this conversation. But T'Pring, you are a researcher. What attracted you to this particular work? What do you find exciting about this work from a research perspective?
Oh, so happy to answer that question. So I started out long ago with an interest in babies, really. It was about babies and how young people develop and how we get kind of from the little tiny thing all the way to adults and what's the pathway. And then, of course, wanting people to be happy, successful by their own definition, adults. So what does that look like? And I went from there into wanting to focus on families with low income, and that was my area. But I knew that I didn't have the constitution to be a clinician or a practitioner. I knew that in order to do that work well, you have to have certain boundaries. You've got to have a certain resilience of going back into the field over and over and over again. And you've got to also be okay with sometimes losing people, people that you've gotten attached to, and maybe they move or maybe they in the program or follow the program. And these are things that I knew that I couldn't handle. I would be just crying and weeping all the time. So I thought, where is my skill set to participate in this larger kind of ecosystem of demand? And research was the place that made the most sense to me. I love asking questions. And when I get the solution or the answer to a question, all it does is bring up more questions. So I was well suited to do research. And then once I got into it and really understood this applied research, which is kind of the vein in which I work, it's very exciting because even though there would be a great intellectual stimulation if I was working theoretically or in academia, and I would really enjoy that. That would be so much fun. But because this is a mission for me and it's not just a job, I really wanted to be in a place where I felt that I was doing some immediate help. So to take that academic work and bring it down and translate it for the folks that are doing the work, quote unquote, that was an exciting opportunity for me. And also to be able to talk to practitioners and not just produce the research that I think is important or that I think is interesting, but to be able to talk to practitioners, talk to families, be in community and hear them say, these are the things that we want to work on. And then to take my skill set and work on those things is very gratifying.
Well, thank you. And as an academic and a higher ed professional person, everything that you said, we could do a whole show on that. But let's transition to Sarah. What about your role and what has attracted you to this work?
Yeah, I think I fell into workforce and economic development as a young professional by happenstance, honestly. I was, knew I was a human services professional from, right from while I was in higher education. And when I entered the workforce, I fell into a job where I was supporting people with disabilities in finding jobs. And I was so impassioned by the work. And how many hours per week, how many hours a year do we spend working and talking about our work? And I love what T'Pring said, like it's a mission for her, it's not a job. And so we identify with our work and making those matches for people in feeling gratified in their work and their employment. So I got hooked into the field almost immediately. And so I've worked in community-based organizations, I've worked in local and state government, and now in philanthropy for 5 years. And so I just feel such deep passion for that work. And I'll just share too that specifically around entrepreneurship, hearing in working with young people in a couple different projects right now. T'Pring and I are working on an amazing project around young youth grant makers and building youth up, supporting young people to be grant makers. Their energy, their creativity, their innovation, the assets that young people in Baltimore bring to the table is must be cultivated, and we must support young people. So that I think also drives me.
It's very clear that both of you are passionate about what you do, and you found something that really gives you a personal sense of mission and accomplishment. I wish that everybody could find that type of I guess joy or pleasure or passion around what they do for work. It's not work in the traditional sense. It's not drudgery, but it's something that you really, really care about. Having said that, T'Pring, let me hear from you about maybe some of the challenges. What are your biggest challenges? You love research, you love operationalizing solutions and seeing them actually, go into be implemented. What are your greatest challenges in that process?
Oh, so many. So there are challenges. So when it comes to the work, this is very complex. Some people call it messy. These are, we're studying quote unquote problems, but at the heart of it, it's people. And people are complex, and people have nuance, and they can be unpredictable, and we're trying to predict behavior. And so it's tricky conceptually. Some people don't really enjoy the ambiguity. You have to kind of walk with faith a lot, saying we're going in the right direction. Let's see, and a lot of humility, because you really don't know where you're going to end up. And this particular type of applied work, where we're really, it's called participatory, where the folks that are being quote unquote studied are part of the study. So they design and they interpret and they do all that. And it's all these different skill sets that come to the table, and at the end you get a better product, right? At the end you get the answer, which incorporates all the people that are touched by whatever the issue is, and it resonates with them, and they have buy-in. And so if comes to implementing something, you've gotten everyone to say, this is a good idea, let's get behind it, let's do it. But getting from, hey, let's look at entrepreneurship in Baltimore, to an intervention that helps support young entrepreneurs in Baltimore, is going to be really, really, really tricky. So that's the conceptual challenge. And I say challenge because sometimes challenges are fun. It's definitely not boring. Another challenge is I need to warm people up to the idea of research and evaluation. Unfortunately, there is a history of researchers coming into communities and just taking at will and giving nothing back. And I know that I carry that with me. Yes, I'm Black, and I'm a woman, and I'm from a marginalized community, and all those things, but I'm still walking in as a PhD researcher with all those tools and all that baggage, and I have to find that balance. But I like that challenge because it allows me to sell people on research, and I love research, so it gives me an opportunity to tell people why it's so great and how it can be helpful and how they can be involved, which I really enjoy. The other challenges, I think, are just about really interpreting the data. So once you're always going to have data. If you go through the process, you're going to have something, you're going to have information. And we have a real responsibility to make sure that we interpret that data in a way that is not misleading, in a way that does not, that does no harm, that is truthful and as accurate as we can do. And so all of those challenges, if you just walk with integrity, I think that will cover a multitude of gaffes and mistakes along the way.
Yeah. Again, you're talking my language. And everything that you said. Sarah, what about you? What are your challenges that you face in this work?
Yeah, I'll just and why I thoroughly enjoy and love partnering with T'Pring, because I come from the the programmatic aspect, and T'Pring from the research and evaluation perspective. So what do we do with what is found, what is discovered? And so I'd really like to answer that question from actually a participatory research. I'm actually going to drop a link to this particular report in the chat so folks can follow up on that. But this research was done at this point 7 years ago. It was soon after Freddie Gray's murder and the uprising in Baltimore, and young people, angry, and the community was angry because of the deep inequities in Baltimore. And there were responses by many different stakeholders in Baltimore. And one of those responses was a program called One Baltimore for Jobs that was funded by the federal government that came to the city of Baltimore. And it was really a workforce opportunity to connect young people, really ages of 16 to 29, of young people who may not be in school or who may not be working. And it was a citywide effort, an opportunity for the ecosystem, if we're talking about, ecosystems, to really support young people with job training, connections, resources, and it was difficult. It was difficult. Many of the practitioners were struggling to attract young people and then retain them. And so this participatory research was an opportunity to, as T'Pring said, ask those questions like why, what's happening in the ecosystem of young people, why they're not engaging. And so there were 7 young community leaders who actually went out in communities all across Baltimore. They were compensated for their time. Again, what T'Pring lifted up is taking, take, and there's nothing in return. But these young leaders who were being tapped repeatedly during this time for why is this happening? Why is this happening with nothing in return? So this opportunity was kind of twofold: to support young leaders to do work and research and be well compensated for their time, and then also ask these questions of young people in communities across Baltimore. And they asked things like, what strategies are most effective for reaching young people with the greatest barriers to employment? What do young people need in order to stay engaged? What would incentivize and support their engagement? What careers do young people aspire to? And how does this compare to the range of opportunities available to them and what the market can bear? What matters around design and delivery of programs? And there was in this report just a rich set of information and findings that came out of it. And I just want to highlight one really, along the theme of entrepreneurship. That was a huge finding, that many teens and young adults, more than a third of those that the young leaders interviewed, crave entrepreneurship and resources to build businesses to benefit their communities. That was a huge finding. Young people want to support their communities, as well as be free from discrimination and discriminatory policies and practices. So that was, one of many findings, but I just want to reach, really lift that up as a major finding. And Ron, you asked about challenges, and I think T'Pring alluded to this too, that these challenges can be opportunities. So this is, I think, a brilliant opportunity for Baltimore.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, we could do multiple segments
we could
on some of the gaps, but it reminds me of some of the work that we're doing here. And just a few days ago, I was sharing at the MEDA conference, the Maryland Economic Development Association conference, about some of the work that we're doing on relational innovations and relational competencies, because that engagement piece, and we're seeing it even on the college level with some of the students, because you have these waves of opportunities that happen that I think pull their opportunities, but they pull students or whoever the population may be in different ways, but it's not necessarily trusted because of part of the history. So there's reluctance to engage, but then when it comes in these sporadic waves, it's so wide and so much that it's like drinking from a fire hose. You can't take, so the people that you're intending to help end up running from this place to that place and not really coming out with the outcomes that will move the needle. So that's a whole different conversation. So let me pivot back to T'Pring for a second. Some of the gaps that may exist in entrepreneurship education. Now you have a perspective that's probably broader and more national. Can you say something about, if you do work in Atlanta, you do work in Baltimore, these various, I guess, urban centers, but also they are trans-regional. Do you see any similarities or gaps in terms of entrepreneurship education on a broader scale from area to area?
Yeah, and I want to be careful to caveat what I'm saying with the fact that the data the empirical data is not as strong as we'd want it to be. So some of this is hypothesis, some of this is observation from the ground, which are all valid data points. But I just wanted to put that out there. But I think there is a push towards entrepreneurship. I'm hoping that I'm seeing, one of the changes that I'm hoping that I'm seeing is, I'd say 15, maybe even 10 years ago, it felt like the push for entrepreneurship was something that was coming from almost outside of communities because there were no jobs, right? And so it was like, well, we have no jobs, so become an entrepreneur. And I felt it resulted in poor outcomes because it was, here's this other route, but we're not going to give you a map. We're not going to give you, the materials you need, but it's like, hey, now you don't have to call yourself unemployed. Now you can call yourself an entrepreneur. And I think a lot has changed since then, where entrepreneurship is once again being seen as a business option, right? So it's not just a hustle. It's not just, the stereotype of, businessman who is somebody who doesn't really have anything. That entrepreneurship is as much science as any other business. It has as many kind of core characteristics as any other type of workforce development, and that it's not separate, right? You can be entrepreneurial within a job. The same skills that can help with workforce development as far as soft skills, relational skills, all of those come in place in entrepreneurship. So I think that I'm seeing those pieces come together more, and even seeing work development and entrepreneurship support happening in the same space. Because why are we making, 16, 17, 18-year-olds decide? Like so that's one. I do think that on the flip side, what I don't see, I'm looking for, but I don't see deeply in entrepreneurial support efforts and programming, is that support that goes beyond setting up your business. I mean, if you're looking at like the Harvard Business Review, or if you're looking at, these top-notch TED Talk people, or anyone giving these master classes, they talk about the number of failures they had. They talk about making wrong turns and how to pivot, and they talk about how to keep going when it gets hard, when it gets dull, and all those things. I feel like a lot of the entrepreneurship programs that are focused on marginal communities, whether they be rural or urban, is, let's help you start a business. Good luck to you, and starting a business is continuing education. Again, there's no one who is a successful entrepreneur who has gone the traditional route, college into maybe business school, into running their business. No one is stopping their knowledge. Everyone is learning how to network, learning how to build up, learning how to do peer-to-peer, as well as, and B2B, as well as B2C. Like, all of these things continue to go. And I think that the next stage of entrepreneurship support, especially for those in inner cities, or those, we'll focus in urban areas, is to have more of a class mentality, more of a educational pathway mentality, as opposed to a launching program.
Yeah, that is absolutely critical. Having been in higher ed for so long now, many of my former students are now seasoned professionals and seasoned entrepreneurs. And one of them in particular, who is the chair of our alumni advisory board for the center, she has a real estate brokerage now, but before she launched into real estate full-time, before she separated from her full-time job, there were 13 years of learning that business, learning that sector. She got a real estate license, she started out selling, but then there was a 13-year period before she got to the point that said, I'm gonna launch out on my own. My client base is such that it doesn't even make sense to be on another job now. And people don't study or transfer the knowledge of that 13 years that happened. So I think we could do a much better job at that. What about you, Sarah? Are there any gaps in the education?
Yeah, I'm going to stick sort of with this theme of, like, you know, the kind of the skills that are learned through entrepreneurship. And I think I just want to share two things. One, I think that there is actually, I'm going to take this maybe from like a funder philanthropic perspective. I think that there's a tendency, and I'm going to say this anecdotally because I've asked my peers about their willingness, or are they funding entrepreneurship programs, and there aren't very many. And scratching my head, you know, wondering why is that? And I think part of that reason is a very traditional mindset and frame around what is workforce development, and that those traditional sort of outcomes of credential attainment, job placement, what is your median wage, like these very traditional ways of thinking about workforce development, rather than thinking about entrepreneurship tracks and education from building skills that can be transferable. Yeah, maybe young people may or may not start their own businesses, but wow, the learning that can occur, the competencies that you build from that type of education, or, you know, writing a business plan, or maybe doing, you know, starting a business and doing it there on a small scale. All of those things are incredibly important. And so I think that a gap is for funders, both public and private, to think differently about what is workforce development. And that leads into my other point. Another gap is in Baltimore specifically, we don't know what comprises the ecosystem. You know, what I shared earlier is this is a huge desire of young people in Baltimore. We must respond to their desires and their needs and their wants. And so how, you know, and you know, we need to understand what is out there. And again, anecdotally, I've asked around, there are lots of different programs that may run the gamut of design and support and outcomes. So I think that is a huge gap, and also a huge opportunity to understand.
Yeah, yeah, I'm hopeful that we can begin to, especially in this moment, as we have all been disrupted by the pandemic. I think it sort of gives us an unexpected and in many ways unwelcomed opportunity to reset in terms of how we do things. We were all pushed off the cliff, so to speak, and now have to rethink everything around how we engage. Part of it is because I know in higher ed, part of it's because of in-person versus virtual versus online versus all of that, and the trickiness that comes along with engaging in these different platforms, but also the opportunity to rethink how we connect. You mentioned the traditional ways of thinking. I have experienced that in some of the research that we're doing, because even in how do you talk about economic impact, and the traditional models just don't fit the gig economy and those that are operating in the gig economy. So, you know, how do you capture what's happening with them? The whole piece about entrepreneurial thinking as that being a goal in and of itself that will help with workforce development, and how do you measure or demonstrate or describe and talk about that from a research standpoint. One last question. This has been so amazing. The time has flown by, Again, we could do this several segments, but thinking about the ecosystem and thinking about institutions such as Coppin State University, for example. Coppin, 122 years of history, engaging underrepresented communities and helping to help them find a pathway into socioeconomic advancement. That's a long history. It's a lot of history of adding value to the, not only to that community, but also the national economy itself. And right now, in this moment where we have huge gaps, in particular in certain sectors, I think about manufacturing and the skills and the talent gaps, and some others in terms of workforce development, the need for entrepreneurs. How can we better leverage the institutions that we have? And again, Maryland is rich in terms of higher ed ecosystem. But sometimes I think that we do miss the mark because there are institutions that have been doing this for a long time, demonstrating success at it. How can we better leverage all of the higher ed ecosystem and help move the needle forward? And I'll just throw that out, and T'Pring and Sarah, you can respond.
Well, I'll give a kind of big picture of what I see with the ecosystem. So one of the things you mentioned, the gig economy, and I had said earlier that way back it looked like entrepreneurship in a lot of ways was being used as a scapegoat. Like, we don't have jobs, let's talk about entrepreneurship. I think with the gig economy, a similar thing might happen, right? Where people are kind of exploiting entrepreneurship and saying, oh, you're an entrepreneur because you're driving for Uber. And there is an entrepreneurial spirit for doing that work, but entrepreneurism is a specific thing. You know, I love, looking at your background, strategic entrepreneurship, hard to say, but it's as much of a science as any other business practice. And so I think one of the ways that the institutions help is by making it clear that this is a business. Again, it's not just a hustle. It's not being used as something to almost pacify, whether it be intentionally and directly or indirectly and implicit, but to pacify minority folks by saying, oh, they're entrepreneurship, but not giving them any of the tools of entrepreneurship, which is access to credit and capital, networking, business plans. Like entrepreneurship, it's wonderful to step back and pat yourself on the back and say, oh, look, there's 3 people doing hair out of their apartment. Well, that's not how you build a business. That's not how you build intergenerational wealth. That's not how you build power. And strategic entrepreneurship is about all of those things. So for the ecosystem, for the institutions to start moving from entrepreneurship as a way to get cash in people's hands to entrepreneurship as a business practice that it belongs in a university, definitely belongs in HBCUs and tribal universities as well, like these and Hispanic serving institutions, these places where those that have been marginalized have become experts at underground economies and side hustles. All we're looking to do is legitimatize those actions and to build capacity within something that's already been done. So I think the steps that you're taking at Coppin State is an example of how the institutions can support that.
Yeah, and I can easily tag into that because we are incredibly, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's a strong understanding of specifically what is the youth entrepreneurship ecosystem in Baltimore. And so we're incredibly excited to develop a partnership with Coppin State as you said, Ron, it's a 122-year-old institution, an anchor institution in Baltimore, that leveraging your partnerships in community and bridging, public-private partnership with community in figuring out and doing, a scan of what is in the ecosystem around youth entrepreneurship. What do we discover from that, and the great questions that we come up with and are answered through the scan, or maybe there'll be more questions, but how can Baltimore wrap around and build and support the building of an ecosystem, with Coppin leading that effort. So we're again incredibly excited. We have a budding partnership with you all, for those of you in the audience, around this work. So we're just excited to move it forward.
Well, I thank both of you. This has been amazing. Glad we were able to get it together for the conference, and I'm sure that those who are viewing it and those who will view it in the future, because all of these will be available on our website moving forward. But I thank you, and I'm excited. I'm looking forward every time we talk. I'm looking forward, excited about the possibilities of what we'll be able to do. So thank you both so much for the time that you've given us today, and we'll keep everyone posted about our emerging collaboration and how we're going to make an effort to contribute to the ecosystem in Baltimore. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.